Welcome back to the Bullshit Filter, Ray Harris, and
Thank
everybody
you.
tuning in from home. This is episode 87, part 2 of our little mini series thing on the Uighurs, as
Right.
you phrased it last time. The
Right. I
Uighurs
thought
in
it was
China.
Wiggles. Wiggles? No, that's something else. Sorry. Something. Hey, boys and girls. Sorry. And they get paid millions. Please continue.
Yes, the other great Aussie conspiracy to take over the world. We had Crocodile Dundee,
Right.
Rupert Murdoch,
Yeah.
the Wiggles,
Right. The trifecta. Is there another one?
and
You.
ACDC.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
four.
Right. I gotcha.
There's a law passed by the United Nations that at least one ACDC track must be used as a soundtrack in every big budget Hollywood film. I think judging by recent
that stands to reason. That stands up, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so last time, for people who haven't listened to the last episode, we sort of looked at the stories coming out here, predominantly in the Western media, about the Uyghur detainment camps in China, and my main
Contention?
no, my main I had one coffee this morning. I can't think. The thing I really wanted to explore when I started this series was to look at the differences in the coverage in the Western media of the Uyghur situation in China and
Right.
say the treatment of the Palestinians by the Israelis.
Ooh, right.
But as I dug into it, I noticed a growing number of discrepancies and problems with the reporting. Now, of course, after the first episode came out, the usual China haters jumped on my head and ranted and raved and screamed and made up stuff that I said, which I didn't say in the show. The claim that I said, that I was, why do you believe everything the Chinese government says? I think I'm very clear in the show in saying I believe that there's propaganda coming out from both sides, and
Absolutely.
what I'm trying to do is figure out where the line is. And one of the ways is looking at the caliber of the sources and the background of the sources. We did a little bit of that last week. We're gonna do more of that in this episode. But before we get into that, I want to talk about getting back to the Jews, China and the Jews.
Uncomfortable.
Well, this is the show where we do uncomfortable things, Ray. You're used to doing uncomfortable
to
things.
each other. Right.
Usually in a bathroom in Vegas, but this is
with a video camera and a smile. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
And a whip. I did come across one article in Al Jazeera. Prominent Jewish figures in the United Kingdom were marking Holocaust's Memorial Day by speaking out over China's treatment of the Uyghurs in China, saying that they had a moral duty to speak out against it. There's a quote: the Holocaust Educational Trust's chair made an explicit analogy with the Holocaust, saying every news report, every video online, every testimony should be a rallying cry for all of us, and that we Jews of all people must not be silent over the Uyghurs. The Reform Movement's senior rabbis declared that defending the Uyghurs was the only moral option we have. When it came to the subject of Palestine, they went, "What? What's a Palestine?" Never heard of it.
Not ringing a bell. I just have to ask real quick. So I think the Jewish leadership in the UK needs to be careful, just because they're bringing this to, or they're making a statement about the situation, which again, all the facts are still cloudy because like you said, the West is saying one thing, China's saying another. And of course, they're both very capable of lying. So we really don't know the details, but the Jewish leadership needs to be very careful. Are they just saying, hey, it's our job to comment on something that may be an inhumane treatment of the people, or are they comparing it to the Holocaust? Because they have to, I think they need to be very careful with that, because that's apples and oranges. You can speak up if you want, but I hope they're not equating what's going on or may not be going on in northwestern China versus what happened during World War II. I just hope they're clear about that.
I think they are equating it,
Yeah,
deliberately
but that's
equating it.
the final solution. Get rid of all the Jews in Europe. They actually killed 6 million of them versus camps in northwestern China that may or may not be re-education camps. That's not exactly the
Not
same
yet.
thing.
No, not
Not
yet.
yet.
I think their
How long
point.
has this has been going on since 1949? If they were going to wipe them out, they could have wiped them out a long time ago. But anyways.
Yes. Like I think their point is it's bad and it could get a lot worse.
It might be bad. We don't know actually. But
Well,
sorry,
they think they do know that it's bad. And listen, and I want to clarify this, and I thought I was clear about this in the last episode. I'm not saying that this isn't happening.
Right.
You know, Noam
Exactly.
Chomsky has come out and signed a letter along with a bunch of other scholars and academics, telling China to cut it out. Noam Chomsky obviously believes it's something's going on. So I'm not saying that it's not going on. I'm saying that what's going on is unclear. And the rhetoric about it has been ramping up extensively in the last couple of years, not coincidentally parallel with the Trump administration's trade war with China. It also it correlates with when China ramped up their activities after the last set of terrorist activities, etc. Terrorist incidents by the Uyghurs or certain elements of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. But so I'm not saying it's not happening, but what I am saying is that the rhetoric is overblown.
Right.
It may all be true. I don't know, but when I dig into it, it seems dicey, and we'll get into more of that later on. The Western media coverage of it is very easy to pick apart, and draw attention to some of the issues with it. And the Western media isn't doing that to itself. Whenever I see the Western media, obviously doing a lazy job of reporting on something, which they're reporting it with massive amounts of rhetoric. It's the greatest tragedy in modern times. We won't ask who the sources are or who's funding them or where they came from or how their stories have changed over the last couple of years, because that's too much detail. We don't want to go into that. My bullshit filter goes off. And also, as I said before, I wanted to compare the rhetoric about this in the Western media versus, the way that the treatment of the Palestinians is covered, etc. It's the coverage of the people that we don't like because we're in the middle of a war, a trade war, an economic war, a war of ideas with, versus the people we consider our allies, even though they do brutal and horrible things, but they're our friends, so we don't talk about it in the same sorts of terms. It's the hypocrisy of the coverage that bothers me.
If I could just add on to that real quick, the point that I'm hearing is, and that I'll make, is that if you just listen to the Western press and you don't question it, you don't try to analyze it, you don't dig down into the sources, as far as you're concerned, this is the beginnings of another Holocaust, which may not be the case. So what China, I wouldn't want to be there. I wouldn't want to be one of the Uyghurs being dealt with by the Chinese government. I'm sure it's very unpleasant and there's probably some bad stuff going on. But is it, like you said, is it to the degree that is being presented? Because again, this is nothing more than a stick to beat the Chinese government with, because why? We are in a trade war and you use any weapon that you could get into your hands.
And this is something we've seen play out before, over and over again. We've seen this kind of we've seen fake moral media outrage. Campaigns against our enemies, and it's only years later, sometimes decades later, that we find out that it was all manufactured. And we go, oh well, that was then, that would never happen now. And
we're too sophisticated to fall for it.
It's 2021. We've got the internet. We know everything. Speaking of Palestine, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has declared that Palestine supports China's legitimate stance on issues concerning its core interests like Hong Kong and Xinjiang. So on one hand, you've got the Jews going, this is a bad situation, but ignoring Palestine. On the other hand, you've got the president of Palestine saying, we're good with detention camps.
Or at the very at the very least, it's the president of Palestine going, you know what? It's an internal Chinese problem. It's within their borders. They get to decide how to deal with it as long as they don't, go too far one way or the other. To me, that sounds like a person who is in a country, running a country that's tired of outsiders having an outsized influence on their internal issues. And I mean, they can certainly relate to what China is going through by everybody telling them how to be and what to do. Palestine's like, look, we don't like it. I'm sure the Chinese don't like it either. So,
Right. But you would think the Palestinians, as a people that are fighting for survival against a larger
right.
now and better funded military that is trying to crush them, would have empathy for the Uyghurs in this situation, of people that want their independence from a bigger power.
Yeah.
It's all so confusing. None of
It's
this
all
makes
over the
sense.
place. Yeah.
It's really weird. Saudi Arabia. This is, I think, leading on from the Mahmoud Abbas statement. He said, Saudi Arabia, where Muhammad was born and died, signed a letter praising China's remarkable achievements in the field of human rights and describing its actions in Xinjiang as de-radicalization measures, including the establishment of vocational education and training centers. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, Algeria, and other Muslim majority states blocked a UN motion calling for China to allow independent international observers into Xinjiang. So the Western media is positioning this as China's Holocaust-like treatment of Muslims, although, as we pointed out in the last episode, there's somewhere between 60 to 80 million Muslims in China. There's only supposedly 1 million in these detention camps. Out of 11 million Uyghurs, and even that million number, it's really hard to get any legitimacy around those numbers. They all seem to come from one or two seemingly biased sources that just keep getting repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated, and everyone believes they're true. But when you try and drill down to, well, who counted those? It's
it evaporates.
some crazy, right-wing evangelical, anti-homosexual, the end of times is coming, Christian German nutcase. Now, but interesting though, that also these leading Muslim countries, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, etc., are supporting China's position here. Of obviously hysterical Saudi Arabia, where the worst, the worst extremist Muslim terrorists come from. They attacked the World Trade Center on 9/11, mostly Saudis, funded by Saudi money, as far as we know. All of the Wahhabist terrorists, Al-Qaeda's comes from, Wahhabi Sunni Muslim. ISIS comes out of Wahhabi Sunni Muslim. So they're the ones going, oh, got to do something about these crazy Muslim terrorists.
But
really,
let me.
Where their crown prince had a guy, chopped up in a bathtub,
literally. Yes,
but they're the ones speaking, going, no, we need to do something about the extremists.
Right. Well, just like America is using this situation, do you think the average American cares, much less knows what's happening to the Uyghurs? Come on, with all due respect to my own country, we don't care. But as America is using this subject like a blunt instrument to beat the Chinese with, these other countries that you just mentioned, who have in their own, they have the right not to like America. And they have very good reasons not to like to America. They're defending another victim of American foreign policy. So again, I don't think
these are all American allies. Saudi Arabia,
they're
Egypt,
I would call them
the UAE,
our economic
Pakistan
allies. Come on, do you think Pakistan likes us? UAE,
they were hiding. They were hiding Bin Laden in the backyard for 10 years. But
thank you. But they love us.
But they're good friends,
No, they like
Saudi Arabia. I mean, how many billions of dollars of weapons do you sell them every year? They're your good buddies. You got the deal.
It's a form of prostitution. It's all about the money, but they really don't like us, and they don't really. I don't think they really have a stake in this. They don't care, but they get to back China.
My point is that on the surface of things, they're not your enemies. They're your allies.
On paper, yes. Yes. That's my point. It's an economic.
It kind of reminds me of our Syrian civil war series. Shout out to Scotty Burbick, who said that
Right.
he's just listened to it for like the fourth time.
Thank you.
By the way, I threw out a challenge to Scotty this week, and if he's
Right.
listening to this or watching this, I
Mhm.
expect you to, don't let me down, Scotty. Don't let me down. I'm counting on you. You're my man. I expect big things out of you. Don't fucking let me down.
Don't.
Um,
As someone who lets
why?
down Cam weekly, don't let him down, Scotty. Please don't. I'm having a good time now. Please continue.
Yeah. Why aren't Arab Muslims more upset about the treatment of their fellow Muslims in China?
Well, as we talked about on the last episode, China is literally in the middle of their multi-billion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative. It's going to affect like 60 countries in the area, where they're trying to improve the infrastructure so people can more efficiently trade with China. Roads, bridges, buildings, structures, that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of countries in that region that are in the perfect position to get really big, I think, either not free, but low interest loans from China to help with the infrastructure, to help China and help trade for everybody. And if you open your mouth and you start complaining about Beijing, you might not get a check like everybody else in the neighborhood's going to get a check. So again, no shock, it comes down to money, lots and lots of money.
So it's the Chinese Marshall Plan.
Hey, it worked for us for decades. It's working for China. I think you should call this episode "Do As I Say, Not As I Do," because we're bitching at China. They're doing things that learn from us. But it's okay when we do it. It's not okay when they do it.
Here's a bunch of money to shut the fuck up and do what we tell you, and crush any internal movements that might be criticizing us. Look, that would seem to be one of the explanations for why these Muslim countries are not as upset about this as they are over Palestine, or as they used to be over Palestine, because we know that a number of these countries recently, Bahrain and I think it was UAE, signed peace deals with Israel, pushed by the Trump administration.
Right.
It was. That's the next note in my things. There you go. I should have just read my notes. The Abraham Accords, named after Abraham Lincoln, because he loved the Jews.
Because everybody loves him, right?
And he loved the Jews and hated the Palestinians.
Oh,
well known. He hated the Negroes and the Palestinians. Abraham Lincoln.
I'm uncomfortable.
And unless they were useful. And then he'd go, "Oh no, the Negroes! No, I changed my mind on that. I think they're great as long as they pick up a gun and fight for us. I think they'll be fantastic."
Right, exactly.
No, named after the patriarch Abraham, the founder of Judaism and Islam and Christianity.
Wow.
In different, they all go up to Abraham.
So if there's a family tree, he's at the top, or whatever you call those diagrams. I don't know what you call.
Yeah, he's like you,
right?
And then all of your illegitimate half man, half pig children running around Virginia for Christianity.
They were conceived in love. Don't even try that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So UAE and Bahrain recently signed the Abraham Accords, basically throwing the Palestinians under the bus. Now, millions of Palestinians have been forced out of their homes and their villages, turned into refugees. According to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, more than 1.5 million individuals live in 58 recognized Palestine refugee camps in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria and other places. But that's okay to the US. And the Western media in general. That's fine.
Yes.
Because
you don't hear about it.
It's Israel doing it, not China.
Yeah.
And like China, Israel doesn't allow human rights watch groups to go into the West Bank to see what's going on.
Smart move.
There are, as I said at the beginning of the last episode, we have this issue with Israel where we go, well, Israel is a democracy and they're capitalist, so they get a pass.
Right.
China, I think your new president, Sleepy Joe, Ukraine Joe, as I like to call him,
Right.
Recently said that there's not a democratic bone in Xi Jinping's body.
Does there have to be? I mean, okay. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
I don't know. Yeah, what the point of that was.
to.
But Germany was a democracy. Let's not forget that. Not just a democracy. Germany in the early 30s, late 20s, early 30s was the world's leading democracy. It was the
Leading
greatest,
light. Yeah.
country in the
Experiment.
world. Produced the greatest thinkers and artists and
Oh, yes.
scientists, authors, poets, musicians.
Yeah.
It was the leading light of the democratic world, and the Nazis came out as a result of that. The Nazi atrocities
Legally.
came as a result of a capitalist democracy.
Yeah. Hitler got power legally. People seem to forget that sometimes, but yeah, he worked within the system, and which is why we have to watch what's going on in the United States very carefully. Not that I'm trying to get sidetracked with the white supremacists and the whole the insurrection on January 6th. So that's why you have to take that stuff seriously, because it can happen again.
And Australia runs concentration camps. We don't like to call them that.
Right.
No,
That's a bad title.
We call them caravan parks, holiday retreats.
Right. Yeah.
But they're concentration camps. People are concentrated in a small area, kept behind bars, who've committed no crimes. They're asylum seekers. There are currently thousands of asylum seekers being held in immigration detention, is what we call it. We like to, ideally keep them away from Australia. We stop them before they get here, and they enter our waters. Our Navy picks them up, or Border Patrol picks them up and throws them on other people's islands where they don't get access to the legal benefits of actually landing on Australian soil.
Right.
We send them to places like Nauru and Manus Island and places like that. And, immigration detention in Australia is indefinite. We grab you, we throw you in a prison, and we can basically keep you there as long as we want. You have no rights. And you're not allowed to talk about it in Australia. If you go there and see what's going on, if you're a doctor or some sort of an activist and you go to these places and you come back, by law, you're not allowed to talk about what you saw.
Does that mean Australia is not a democracy?
No, we're a democracy. You're just not allowed to talk about certain things that would be uncomfortable to talk about.
Oh, conditionally, you're a democracy. Welcome to the club.
Well, look, this gets back to our freedom of speech topics that we've talked about before. There's no complete freedom of speech anywhere.
Right.
There are always limits on freedom of speech, and with good justification, usually. There are limits to all of our freedoms, including freedom of speech.
Right.
And that happens to be one of them now in Australia. You can't talk about the detainment camps. Don't talk about the war. I talked about it once, but I think I got away with it.
Good. Just in general, do you know roughly how long these camps have been going on that the Australian government's been doing? I'm just curious.
It'd be 20 years now.
Okay.
Guessing? Yeah.
Okay.
We started to get really worried about asylum seekers around about the time of 9/11. A little bit before that, they were coming in when John Howard was first elected in the late 90s. But then after 9/11, we sort of cracked down anyone, because a lot of them are Muslims coming from war-torn Muslim countries, and we just throw them on islands, and they're dark people, right? Dark Muslims. So, we don't really worry too much about them.
What happens if you do let them go? Are they going to be slightly pissed at Australia? Were they maybe seeking hope from Australia at one point, and now they hate everything that you stand for? And they would really like to hurt you, but you've got them locked up in a camp. So I guess maybe you can't let them go now, or you've turned them into extremists, kind of like Guantanamo. Again, these are things I guess we don't know because we're not allowed to talk about it or find out.
And you could say the same thing about the camps in Xinjiang, I guess. I don't think we're running our camps as re-education camps. I think we just throw them in there, and there are stories that come out about them being raped and abused and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't get a lot of media play here. And when our media has tried to talk about those things in recent years, as well as the actions of our soldiers in Afghanistan, killing people, civilians.
Yes.
The government has sent the federal police in to storm their homes, the journalists' homes, and their media offices, and take their computers and, basically terrorize them, threaten to throw them in prison.
Right. I just have to ask one last follow-up question. Do you know roughly what are the numbers in the Australian organized camps? If you have any idea.
Yeah, sure. Just thousands, I believe.
Okay. Because in Guantanamo, I think in Guantanamo, what I read on one source was in the last, 20 years, 780 people have been through there. There's down to about 40 people now. But like you just said with the Australian camps, some of those people have been there since 2001, 2002. They have lost the prime of their life being held and not charged. And if they weren't radical before, if they were innocent before, they're certainly not have benevolent thoughts towards America now. If you do let them out, they probably will want to get some revenge. So the whole thing is, I certainly don't have the answer, but we certainly created a horrible situation with these people.
It's like when you invaded Iraq and, killed Saddam Hussein, right, and then went, wow, we've created the mess now. We have to stick around. We can't leave. Right. Same sort of a deal. Well, we threw them in prison, these guys. Probably most of them were innocent. Now, what are we going to do? But, it does, and it's not just Guantanamo, but it's all the CIA black sites, the secret torture camps around the world where the CIA was sending people that they pull off the street in Iraq and Afghanistan just because, a neighbor or somebody said, oh, yeah, they're terrorists. You should go get those guys. Again, that gets justified by the American government. And the American media on and off, depending on, it was justified for a long time. These days it's less popular, because they blame it on Bush. But it was justified for a long time and with legal justification from the American government. So it seems, again, extremely hypocritical to say it's okay for us to throw people in prison because we suspect they might be connected with Muslim extremists. When the Chinese do it, it's a human rights tragedy. Now the numbers are very different, 700 versus 1 million, if that million is in fact correct. There's massive difference, I get that, but the principle is the same. The ethics, the morals are the same. It's very difficult to give me an argument that says, well, we can do it. It's okay when we do it, but it's a human rights tragedy when someone else does the same thing.
Well, in America, we like to say everybody's equal before the law. So you're right. It's not about numbers, whether it's 780 or 1.5 million. It's the principle. Either someone's innocent until they're proven guilty, or they need their day in court, or whatever. It's not about the numbers. But again, we have done horrible things that we've justified, we've excused, we've put it in a certain context. But when China does it, it's borderline Holocaust events happening, and they need to stop it right now.
And of course, the Japanese internment during World War II, another case in point, under FDR, Democratic administration, these people had done nothing. But they were considered threats, so they were just rounded up and thrown in jail for several years.
I just started doing some research on that because that's coming up soon in the World War II show. But I found out, because a lot of this I didn't know. So you're right, FDR, he did the executive order 9066. It affected 117,000 lives, who the majority of those people that were grabbed up and put in the camps, they were already American citizens. Canada did the same thing. They did it with about 21,000 people. Mexico did the same thing with a smaller number, but eventually it spread to Peru, Brazil, Chile, Argentina. That they grabbed it, gave it to us, and we put them in our camp. So obviously one of the darkest moments of American history. Some people try to argue that we were saving them because they would have been attacked or killed by American citizens or whatever. But if that happens, then obviously you arrest the white American citizen who attacked the Japanese American citizen who didn't do anything. The whole thing is a clusterfuck. It was a huge mistake Chinese are being accused of now. It's either wrong then or wrong now, or I don't know how. Basically, again, it just goes back to it's just us using it to beat the shit out of the Chinese because of trade practices that we don't like. So if it was wrong then, it's wrong now. End of discussion. It doesn't matter who's doing it or why they're doing it. in my humble opinion.
Yeah. You know, it is. I mean, look, yes, we can get into the nitty gritty arguments between numbers and well, that was a war and this is different and that and this and that and whatever. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, yeah, ethically, morally, it's the same sort of argument. I think it's very hard to legitimately argue that they're very different things, I think.
Yeah.
And in terms of brain, you know, one of the things that people get upset about is, oh, they're brainwashing these people apparently in the camps.
Yeah.
But America brainwashes its entire population every day. As I said on the last episode, I think, how many times do kids have to swear allegiance to the flag during their school years?
I remember, don't enjoy this too much. I remember as the early 1970s, I was obviously in elementary school. I had my Buster Brown shoes on. You don't have to know what those are. And I don't know what they're called. There's a specific name, but my mom used to dress me in a fake turtleneck. It was a turtleneck with a piece of cloth that stopped right here, covered by a second very gaudy 1970s shirt, but it looked like I had two shirts on. It was just the turtleneck neck part of the shirt. Anyway, those have a name. I remember standing up, told to put my hand on my heart. We pledge allegiance to the United States, and we did the same thing. I don't remember how long I did it. I don't remember when it stopped. It probably stopped when we moved from a school because my father was in the Air Force, but I remember doing it in elementary school for a very long time, and I finally got good at it, and then we didn't do it anymore. So, but we didn't have any idea what we were doing, but we were told to do it, and we did it. Even though they couldn't make us do it. There's a 1949 Supreme Court ruling saying you can't do that, but some schools got away with it. They found ways around that.
And they just do it. I mean, and most parents are okay with it, I think, because they're like, yeah, America, bitch, this is what we do.
There was a couple of states where the parents had to specifically write a note in order for you to get out of it. But then again, of course, then you get ostracized and your parents get talked about. So peer pressure. Yeah.
Probably secret communists. And, you know, that's just one aspect of the brainwashing of Americans. And look, every country gets brainwashed to an extent. Chrissy and I had a big discussion about Australian brainwashing. You know, we have Australia Day. It's become more of a thing in the last 20 years as we've tried to Americanize it. Our conservative governments have tried to Americanize it. But, you know, outside of that, we don't swear any oaths. We got Anzac Day, maybe, and Australia Day. But, you know, again, those two things are a bigger deal now than they were in my childhood when they were just kind of weird, like small relic-y things, I think. But in the pro-Americanization of our culture in the last 25 years, they've tried to make them a bigger deal, more patriotic. You see people with, you know, Australian flags on their cars on those days and lots of speeches about Australia's great sacrifices and that kind of nonsense. Anyway, but look, you know, American brainwashing from an outsider seems very evident to me, with all of your films and your TV about America versus the world, how you're the great, you know, the heroes of the world, all this kind of crap that people say with, you know, absolute seriousness, like the president of America is the leader of the free world. This kind of
powerful man.
People believe that. They believe that is true. They literally think that's what's going on.
Leader of the free world. You hear that, I don't know how many times a week on the news when they're describing, when you can't just keep saying the president over and over and over again. They will not hesitate to say the leader of the free world when the rest of the country is like, what the fuck are they talking about? Are you following it? You know, whatever. So we don't know that. We don't know any better because we don't care about things outside of our borders, like the Uyghurs. And so we all assume that you all are towing the line because we're told it, so it must be true.
And then, you know, you've got the NSA monitoring all of your calls and your emails, as well as the rest of the world's calls and emails. And the US government lied about it for many years. Until Edward Snowden blew the whistle on it. So look, my point is that, like, there's all of this bad stuff going on in your own country, historically and today, which gets completely justified. But when China does it, they're outright evil. But, you know, if we're being balanced and neutral, we need to call out China's treatment of the Uyghur people, and look for evidence of human rights abuses. But we also need to call out Australia and its actions against asylum seekers, as well as our Indigenous population. We need to call out the USA for doing similar things, and all the other countries that do these sorts of things as well. Now, people, you know, these days people like to go, well, that's whataboutism. And I've talked about this before. Whataboutism is just a word that was invented to try and stop people comparing the moral and ethical equivalencies of what two separate nations do. You know, in an effort to try and prevent that kind of comparison, people think today that you can just say, well, that's whataboutism, and that's going to shut it down, which is a ridiculous bullshit ploy. Yes, I am deliberately drawing analogies between the two and saying, well, if you're going to criticize one, criticize the others, including yourselves, equally. I mean, that just seems like the right thing to do, and address your own issues, maybe, whilst feel free to criticize other countries' behaviors, but address your own issues at the same time. Honest. Otherwise, you're just full of shit.
It takes a certain amount of courage to do that, and courage is lacking these days.
And there were Uyghur guys in Guantanamo Bay.
How did they get there? Well, weren't they volunteering for ISIL and things like that? Some of them were. So, yeah.
Were they? Is there evidence for that?
There's not evidence, but that's what the Chinese government has said, that here's further proof that that these people are terrorists and not just
the ones in Gitmo.
Yeah. That they are terrorists because they ended up joining ISIL and another organization. And so here's the proof. And we're like, well, again, if you've been treating them like shit since 1949, I would be a little agitated as well. So, but again, it's a justification to round these people up because they are. And the other thing I learned from a China hand is that the China government, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, this is just how they do things. They use the word terrorist for everything, anybody who steps outside of the line, separatist, extremist, anybody who's causing trouble. And it's not a trick so you can be mean to them, but that's how the government views anyone who's not towing the line. Because again, the Chinese government is communism, and their government, at least theoretically, is saying, look, we're all the same. We're all pulling on the same oars. We're all working together. If you are not doing that, you are more than just being lackadaisical. You're actually working against the country's goals. So they use the term terrorist for practically everything. So you have to remember that when you're reading any of their press releases or anything like that. That's just
you're
their mentality.
With us or you're a terrorist.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they certainly. I mean, their policy of social management,
they take very seriously.
Yeah, it's very different to the West. You know, they're like, no, it's you know, it harkens back to the vanguard concept in, you know, Marxist thought, Leninist thought, that you have in a communist government, communist revolution, and communist government, you have a small group of the elite, if you like, the intellectual elite of the party, which are the vanguard, whose job it is to run everything because they know what's best for people. Now in the West, obviously, we hate that idea. We arc up against it, even though that's pretty much what happens in our countries as well. But we call it something different, and we mask it with you know, fake elections and that kind of stuff, where you're basically electing them, you know, rich white guys, whichever way you go. You get a choice between two rich old white guys. That's your option.
I need you rich white guys to go in the House of Representatives. I need you rich white guys to go to the Senate. I need you rich white guys to go on the Supreme Court. We'll mix in a couple of other things to make it feel good, and the White House. Good democracy.
Now here's Goldman Sachs to tell you what your marching orders are for the next 4 years.
Here's your policies right here.
Yeah. No, look, we don't like this idea of the vanguard and you know, this hard social management. I understand that. I don't like it either. I wouldn't like to live under that. I get it. The flip side is, as you know, we've talked about on the show before, China has pulled itself out of abject poverty 40 years ago to being the world's number one or number two leading economy. And you know, they've basically cured most of their poverty. I think 85% of the country was in poverty 40 years ago, maybe higher than that, 90%. Now it's down to 5 or 10%, something like that. They've done an incredible job. So if it, as Tony Coniston likes to say in our QAV show about his investing methods, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Exactly. You can sit there and go, well, we don't like that. And they're like, well, we don't fucking care because it works. You don't like it. Yeah, look at the results. Yeah. Exactly.
Results
it works.
Based. Yes.
Yeah. We are now one of the leading powers in the world because of how we run the show. You don't like it, we don't care. And look, I've never been to mainland China. I've been to Hong Kong, but I've never been to mainland China. I don't know how Chinese people feel about it in general, but I know we have listeners on this show that used to live in China, know Chinese people, whatever. But we also had John Pabon come on the show. I played a clip from him last week, and he made the point, and I think makes sense. But we talk about on our history shows all the time. Most people just want to get on with life. They want a roof over their head, food in their belly. They want to get laid a couple of times a week. They want to have their families. They want to have a job. They want some money in their pocket. They want to, get some entertainment.
Yeah.
They want peace and prosperity and stability. Right.
Yeah. That's
if you
so they can make plans. Yes.
Yeah. And you just you can enjoy your life. If your government is giving you those things, then I think most people, you're going to have your activists who go, well, they're not giving them to us in the right way. But most people are like, it's good. It's working, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Particularly if they remember the dark times. Well, you remember 1970? We were all poor. Now we're not.
Right.
Good, right?
Oh, good. Yeah, keep it going.
Meanwhile, America's economy, middle class is disappearing and all this kind of stuff. So in the last 50 years, America's been going like that. China's been going like that.
Yeah.
In terms of the living standards of most people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But look, I get it. We don't like the way they do things, but they do the way, it's like when I talk to Iraqis and we talk about Saddam Hussein. We've got a lot of Iraqi immigrants here. I've mentioned this before on various shows. And I say, what was life under Saddam like? And they go, you know what? It was pretty good. As long as you didn't get on his bad side, it was pretty good. For the vast majority of Iraqis under Saddam, life was good. It was a relatively secular, modern country with all the trappings of a modern economy. We lived well. Then the Americans came in and fucked it all up. They removed Saddam and the place turned into a complete shit show, which it's been now for 20 years. And 10 years before that, after Gulf War I, they started fucking with it in a big way.
Right.
Anywho, moving right along. I want to talk about, China inviting the UN to visit the education centers in Xinjiang back in 2019. They apparently invited them to come and visit. And ABC News in the US did visit the camps in 2019. According to a report that I read from the ABC over there, all of the detainees ABC News was granted permission to speak with said they had applied to go to these vocational centers and that they were being detained voluntarily. However, despite what ABC News was shown on its tour, academic researchers knowledgeable in the region say these chaperone tours are highly orchestrated and staged prior to media arrival.
Yeah.
And who did they quote? Who is their academic researcher who's knowledgeable?
Who has no peer. Yeah. Tell me about Adrian Zenz.
Adrian Zenz. Well, we talked about him on the last episode.
Right.
Adrian Zenz, complete German right-wing Christian nut job who wrote a book saying the end of the world is coming and only 22,000 people are going to go to heaven, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that he's criticizing the Chinese because it's God told him to do it. It's part of his Christian mission to make the world ready for the coming of Jesus. And like he's batshit crazy, but the ABC News neglected to mention that.
Aren't they supposed to do their due diligence? Okay, you're an expert, but it's my job. If I'm going to ask you questions and take your information and put it on my news show, shouldn't I check you out? Shouldn't I check out your background? Have people tell me about you? It sounds like that wasn't done because, oh, China expert, China hand, here you go. We'll just take our Uighur expert, I guess I should say, and let's just use this guy and run with it.
I'm the Uighur expert. Hip,
Oh,
hop,
sorry.
hip to the
Hippity hop.
hip, hop, and you don't stop. So after we posted the last episode, somebody on our Facebook page or my Facebook page, I can't remember which,
Right.
said, was going to town saying that we were justifying Uyghur atrocities, blah, 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 Chinese atrocities against the Uyghurs, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, what evidence do you have that the atrocities are going on? And he sent me a new BBC news story titled, "Their goal is to destroy everyone. Uyghur camp detainees allege systematic rape." So, I go and read that article. More harrowing stories from survivors from the camps. And this time they explained a little more about how one of them ended up living in the USA. Remember I said last time, how did these people get to the USA? These people who said they were being tortured and now they're living in a nice house in America, usually around your way, Virginia.
Yeah.
So this one woman that they're talking about, and I'm going to get into her story a little bit later in more detail, but this article says that she was brought to the United States by the Uyghur Human Rights Project. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder who they are. So, because the article didn't tell me who they are. So it's run by a guy called Mr. Omer Kanat. He's the executive director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, the UHRP. It says it's, according to Wikipedia, it's a human rights research and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. Omer Kanat has 2 decades of experience as a broadcast journalist. Really, I think to myself, where was he a broadcast journalist?
Oh, okay.
Well, from 1999 to 2009, Mr. Kanat was senior editor at Radio Free Asia's Uyghur service. Prior to his work at Radio Free Asia, he was editor and later senior editor at Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty's Tajik service. Radio Free Europe, Ray. We talked about them on another show recently. What can you tell everyone about Radio Free Europe?
Wasn't that the brainchild of the men who helped start the CIA? I think it started something like in 1949, something like that. And if I remember correctly, it wasn't until like 1976 that it came out that Radio Free was really nothing more than a front for the CIA, being paid for out of the CIA's coffer. Obviously, Radio Free continued on from there, but supposedly not at the behest of the CIA. Come on, let's be honest. But it still has very pro-American views in its program. So whether it's being paid for by the CIA anymore is almost non-relevant because it's still doing this job it was doing since 1949, espousing a certain point of view. America good, all you sons of bitches bad.
Yeah, Radio Free Europe and all of the Radio Liberties, Radio Free this, Radio Free that around the world were CIA fronts deliberately set up to spread anti-communist propaganda.
Yes.
By the CIA.
Or any other enemies we have. Yeah.
Yeah, mostly, 1949 when it was established at the beginning of the CIA, it was anti-communist propaganda. And this is one of the reasons why communist leaders around the world, Fidel Castro, etc., would shut down radio stations and later television stations and newspapers in their countries that were being funded secretly by the CIA. Of course, the Western media, Western governments would portray that as, they're oppressing freedom of speech. And the Westerners would go, oh, well, that's really bad, because they didn't know that it was being funded by the CIA. But Fidel Castro knew it was being funded by the CIA, but the Americans didn't. So everyone's like, oh, shock horror, this is horrible. But of course, when Russia tries to build media sites to influence the way Americans think,
Right.
It has to be shut down. That's horrible.
Infiltration.
You can't. That's
Yes.
trying to influence
No.
our democracy. But we did it. We've been doing it
Yeah.
for 80 years around the world. But when you do it to us, you're interfering with our democracy. When we do it, we're spreading freedom. Yeah.
Freedom-loving people. Do as I say, not as I do.
Okay, so that's the guy who runs the UHRP, but I dug down deeper, and like I got to tell you, like this sounds like I'm the world's greatest investigative journalist. Honestly, people, this stuff takes me 5 minutes quite often. Like I go, that's interesting. Wonder who these guys are. Search. Oh shit! Look at that. Fuck me. Why didn't anyone mention this before?
Good BBC find out. Yeah,
the Uighur Human Rights Project is part of something called the World Uighur Congress, funded mostly by the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED.
Right.
American
organization
that we've talked about on this series many times. This is basically, it was developed, I think, by Kennedy, from memory, and it was a new way of influencing underground counter-revolutionary movements around the world, anti-communist movements, by just basically funneling American money to it. They realized, well, we've got another way of doing this. We go, oh no, we can do this above board. We don't need to make it a secret. We go, yeah, we're just giving them money to help spread democratic ideas around the world. Who can argue with that, right?
Because they're the best.
Nice.
The best, Jerry.
Headquartered in Munich, Germany, the World Uighur Congress, WUC, the WUC, is an international umbrella organization with a network of 33 affiliates in 18 countries around the world. The WUC and its affiliates, particularly the Uighur American Association, Uighur Human Rights Project, and Campaign for Uyghurs, are cited in nearly every Western media report on China's Uighur Muslims. From its inception, I got this from the Grey Zone, actually, so shout out to Max Blumenthal and his team. From its inception, the WUC has been backed by the National Endowment for Democracy. With millions in US taxpayer money, the NED and its subsidiaries have backed opposition parties, civil society groups, and media organizations in countries targeted by the US for regime change. Philip Agee, the late CIA whistleblower, described the work of the NED as a more sophisticated version of the old-fashioned covert operations that Langley used to engineer. Nowadays, Agee explained, instead of having the CIA going around behind the scenes, trying to manipulate the process by inserting money here and giving instructions secretly and so forth, they now have a sidekick, which is this National Endowment for Democracy. Agee's assessment was confirmed by Alan Weinstein, a former Trotskyist and founding member of the NED. Weinstein told the Washington Post in 1991, a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA.
What does the mafia call it? Layers.
Layers, Jerry. Levels, Jerry. Levels. Yeah.
Jeez. Just do it out in the open. It's okay if you do it in the open. Go ahead.
The NED this is again from the Grey Zone. The NED has provided the WUC with millions of dollars in funding, including 1.284 million since 2016 alone. I think this is a few years old, this article, and millions of dollars in additional funding to WUC affiliate organizations. The grants are earmarked for training Uighur activists and youth in media advocacy and lobbying to raise awareness of and support for Uighur human rights, with a particular focus on US Congress, European Parliament, and the United Nations.
I did not realize we were such good guys. I mean, I suspected we were good guys, but I didn't know that we cared so much about the Uyghurs. That's a lot of money.
Well, it's not that much money. I was like, $1 million. Well, that's nothing.
Yeah.
But you don't need to spend a lot of money, I guess. You use the money to create these stories, and then you get them in all of your friendly media outlets around the world, and it just gets picked up and it runs with. You don't need to spend a lot of money. It's basically just PR. It's a PR campaign.
They're getting a lot of bang for their buck.
Yeah, to create justification for punishing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so that's one part of the Uighur human rights project, but there's more. But wait, there's one more thing, Ray.
For an extra $9.95. Sorry, go ahead.
Where did it come from? This Uighur human rights project, or the WUC, the Uighur, what did I say that stood for? The Uighur World Uighur Congress.
Where did it go?
It goes back to a guy called Isa Yusuf al-Ptekin.
Right.
He was one of the founders of the Uighur separatist movement that we've talked about, which emerged in the sort of 50s after the communist revolution took control. This guy, Al-Ptekin, I'm probably fucking that up, but Al-Ptekin was a member of the Kuomintang, that fought against Mao Zedong.
Right.
And was given billions of dollars, as we've talked about in our Cold War show, by the United States to try and support them in fighting the communists. So he was on the losing side of that war, but he was Islam, and like your Christian leaders in America in the 30s, 40s, and 50s who saw socialism as a threat to Christianity, he saw socialism as a threat to Islam, because we know that, going right back to the Communist Manifesto, Marxism sees religion as one of the tools of oppression of the people, and they want to wipe out religion generally. I mean, they allow it, obviously, in China, because there's Christians are there, and there's 80 million Muslims, etc. But, at a theoretical level, and it's allowed in Russia now and all that kind of, but at a theoretical level, communists don't like religion. Although in practice, most socialist experiments around the world, including Cuba and places like that, have allowed religion to coexist, even though they don't like it. They've allowed it because eliminating it is like, I think Fidel in his autobiography said, eliminating religion is like eliminating racism or eliminating anti-homosexual feelings in the population. They used to get criticized for treatment of homosexuals, and then he goes, hey, it's not us, it's the people. We try and stop them from doing it, but this is deep, this, and it ties in with religion and all this kind of stuff, right?
Exactly.
Anyway, I mean, you could say that's an excuse, but I mean, you've got racism and anti-LGBTQ movements and white extremism in the US. The US hasn't been able to shut that shit down, and why should these countries be able to shut it down? It's hard, right? When these are deep things that go way back. They're generational, very hard to
identity politics
get rid of overnight. Anyway, so that was Yusuf. He founded the Uighur separatist movement. His son, Erkan Alptekin, is the founder of the World Uighur Congress and was their first president. In 1971, due to his father's connections, he got a job at Radio Free Europe in Munich. Radio Liberty. He worked as a senior policy advisor, and in the 70s and 80s, he became an advisor to the CIA, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Bedfellows.
So, So look, the CIA have been involved with the World Uighur Congress for a long time. And, in large part between their involvement and the NED's involvement, we just have to be aware that all of these stories are being funded basically by the CIA and the NED at the end of the day, who are anti-communist China. That's and pro-American objectives, which is mostly about American economic dominance, which obviously, doesn't sit well with Chinese economic ascendancy.
And
also in that BBC story that I was talking about, it goes on to say, internal documents from the Coons County Justice System from 2017 and 2018 provided to the BBC by Adrian Zenz, a leading expert on China's policies in Xinjiang, etc., etc., etc. don't go
Right.
on to explain that he believes in the rapture and that homosexuality is the work of the Antichrist. Again,
Exactly.
like every time, like every story, man, I get this
Go-to
guy
guy.
popping up and they never say,
Yeah.
but before you listen to anything this guy says, he's batshit
Right.
crazy. Like
That's right. Tinfoil hat.
it's
Yeah.
mind-boggling how often these stories, you know, come back to this same set of really flawed sources and never mention how flawed these sources are.
Yeah. Because they themselves don't want to look stupid or irresponsible. But that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking the short way out. It's like doing a podcast and relying on Wikipedia. I mean, that is just pathetic. But the point is, they obviously they should be doing more balanced.
Yeah, they should do more work than you, Ray. Come on, they're the BBC. I don't expect much out of them, but
you would think, hey, let me give you my overall impression.
On the other hand, your justification can always be, hey, yeah. I work as hard as the BBC.
That's right. A fine institution that's been around for a very long time. So I was walking my dog today and I was thinking about the whole Uighur situation.
Is that a euphemism for
no, not this time.
Okay.
No. Let me give you my general take on it. Here's how I see it. China is just in a really bad situation. Like, I don't need to go through the stats again, but you've got the northwest corner of their country. It's a pretty big place, and it's got just shit tons, because that is a real number, shit tons of different resources worth a lot of money, and no one walks away from money. But on that land, those people have been there for a very long time. People either really don't fit in with the Communist Party, they have their religion, or they actually truly want to separate from the country and do their own thing. And China, just like any other country, can't let them go. You can't let someone go with billions and billions of dollars in natural resources. It's just not going to happen. So what is China going to do? They can either crack down hard, like I think what happened in the late 1940s, early 1950s, or they can do what they appear to be doing now. Is there some arrests? Are people in re-education camps? Could be. I do know that a lot of the people who are affluent in that region are not the locals. It's the Han people who have been moved in. They have, with the help of the government, they are the ones who now own businesses and employ people or whatever. So even the locals are not benefiting from the resources that are in their country. China is just in an unenviable situation. Great opportunity. You've got the problem of the people. And do you kill them all? Do you lock them all away? China's probably not doing that. Are they doing some kind of middle of the road approach? It sounds like they're doing something like that, but they're certainly not going to get credit from the Western countries, the Western news agencies, because they're our adversary, and you take any opportunity you can to bash your adversary. That's just the way the world works. So if America, if Australia, if the UK, if any Western democracy was in the same situation with this shit ton of money, potential money, but the people are a problem, what would they do? I seriously doubt if we would be handling it any better. And I seriously doubt if we would tolerate anybody criticizing us for trying to handle this very delicate situation. So I just think it's a really tough nut for China to crack, and they're not getting any help from anybody else. And we couldn't handle it any better. That's my 2 cents on the larger picture of what Beijing's going through.
Yeah, look, it's very easy to say everything that China says is a lie regarding the situation. But if you pause that for a second and say, okay, let's say there's an element of truth in what they're saying, and that there is a massive separatist movement that has been conducting terrorist attacks, that's run by Islamic extremists. What should they do in this situation? What would be the right course of action? Just stop and ask yourself that at the moment. Let's say that there is a massive separatist movement led by Islamic extremists in this part of the country. What's the right approach? What should they do? Well, what are the options? Do nothing.
Right.
B, only do something when there's every terrorist attack, arrest the people involved, and then go back to monitoring the situation and doing nothing.
Right.
C, which seems to be their approach, try and round up all of the people involved in the separatist movement and throw them into prison and try and talk them out of being part of a separatist movement.
Right.
Or D, go in and kill them all. Tiananmen
true
Square style.
Holocaust. Right.
Bring the tanks in. Yeah. Or you'll put them in camps and kill them, right?
Right.
When Abraham Lincoln, founder of the Abraham Accords, had a separatist movement in the South 150 years ago in the United States, he started a war, which led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. And at the time, that was a big percentage of your population.
Yes.
It was a significant, I can't remember though. We did do the numbers on one show. It was like,
I know that
something.
I don't remember. I do know that roughly 600,000 men died on both sides. But still, they were all Americans, and so that was truly a generation that we lost because of that war. 5 years.
So it's not clear to me what critics of China think China should be doing in this situation.
Exactly.
Now, maybe, I mean, if you wanted to say, well, rounding them up and putting them into prisons is fine, but they should be not tortured or raped. And there should be humane treatment of them in the prisons. Totally agree with that. Everyone in prison should be treated decently with dignity as human beings, regardless of the level of crime that they've committed. So, I'm fully on board for that. But if you say they shouldn't be arresting them and putting them in prisons, what should they do? It's not clear to me what their alternative is. I mean, it's a bunch of bad options, it seems to me. Anyway, just to wrap up, I want to because we're over an hour here. I want to go back to this BBC article now. Apart from batshit crazy Adrian Zenz that they quote, their main witness in this story is a woman called Tursunay Ziawudun. She's one of the women who's all over the media as a witness, firsthand eye account witness. Again, sort of being funded, paid for by the Uighur, Congress, Human Rights Project, whatever. So being funded by the CIA/NED to tell these stories. Now, in this story in the BBC, she said that when she was there, her earrings were yanked out, causing her ears to bleed because they were taking all of their jewelry away, all the women's jewelries in the camps. Then she said police began interrogating her about her absent husband, knocking her on the floor when she resisted and kicking her in the abdomen. Police boots are very hard and heavy. So at first I thought he was beating me with something, she said. Then I realized that he was trampling on my belly. I almost passed out. I felt a hot flush go through me. Sounds terrible.
Right.
However, in February 2020, a year ago, she was interviewed in BuzzFeed and she said, I wasn't beaten or abused. The hardest part was mental. It's something I can't explain. You suffer mentally, being kept someplace and forced to stay there for no reason. You have no freedom. You suffer.
Maybe she dreamed it, the boots. So the point is, what's the truth? Was she lying then? Is she lying now? Was she paid to give that story now that she's out of there? I mean, so again, you got one person giving two different stories. How are we supposed to know what the truth is?
And that's a big difference in stories. I wasn't beaten or abused to that they were trampling on my belly.
I almost passed out. Yeah.
And I almost passed out. And then she also said later on, we were all handcuffed and shackled and were frequently called out for interrogation. So yes, point one is her story has changed over time.
Right.
Now there may be valid explanations for that. Maybe when she was first interviewed, she forgot that she was stomped on. Maybe she was worried about speaking the truth. I mean, there are potentially extremely valid explanations for that. Right. But the other issue here is that the BBC doesn't point out that she's changed her story over the last year.
Right. If you're going to give the story as accurately as you possibly can, and not just going for sensationalist points.
They're telling the one version of a story without going, however, a year ago, she said something completely different. And why? I mean, a journalist, an unbiased, neutral journalist should be doing the work that fucking I have to do here.
If you could do it, I think they have slightly better resources than you. They should be able to at least go up to Cameron level, is my guess.
Come on, let's not expect too much from them.
Okay, between the ray, you can barely see it, the ray and so we can't, it's off the chart, the camera level, somewhere in between that. Come on. Give me
Yeah. And in the last episode, I talked about another woman who's in the media a lot as a source, whose story doesn't hold up very well, Miri Gul Tursun. And the third woman that I came across in a lot of articles is called Saraya Gul Sautbay.
Right.
In October 2019, she was interviewed by Haaretz in Jerusalem. She said they were forced to eat meat in the camp. Meat was served on Fridays, but it was pork.
Right.
The inmates were compelled to eat it, even if they were religiously observant and did not eat pork. Now, me being forced to eat pork, I'm like, fuck yes, bring it on. I mean, it's great.
Maybe they were trying to make sure these people didn't suffer from malnutrition. And I'm not being sarcastic. Go ahead.
No,
sorry.
There's more to the story.
Okay.
Because when you go back to her interview in the Globe and Mail in August 2018, she said detainees only had 3 kinds of food: rice, soup, and vegetable soup and naan bread. Sorry, let me go back. Rice soup, vegetable soup, and naan bread. There was no meat.
Oh, so she was forced to eat something they didn't have to give.
In Haaretz in October 2019, she said there were all kinds of tortures there. Some prisoners were hung on the wall and beaten with electrified truncheons. There were prisoners, I'm like, who comes up, who's going, you know what? This truncheon's not really doing the job. I mean, it's breaking bones and internal bleeding, but you know what? I think we can, let's not get lazy here. Let's improve on this.
Yeah. So zip out. Yeah. Yeah.
There were prisoners who were made to sit on a chair of nails. I saw people return from that room covered in blood. Some came back without fingernails.
Gotcha.
Most extreme sounding, torture, horrifying torture. Unfortunately, in August of 2018 in the Globe and Mail, she said she personally did not see any violence.
I heard about it from a friend whose plumber brother's cousin heard that and told me.
So again, there may be legitimate explanations for this, but
if you keep stacking them up. Yeah.
If in a couple of hours of research, I can pick a whole bunch of holes with these stories, then you have to wonder, what's really going on? Why are their stories changing so dramatically over the course of that year or two?
Right.
B, why aren't the Western media agencies reporting on the discrepancy between their stories? Why aren't they reporting about how the World Uighur Conference is funding all of this and how it in turn is funded by the NED and its background is with the CIA as a CIA front, et cetera, or CIA affiliate organization? Probably, I'm not. Why aren't these stories being told by the media?
Right.
I have to. So again, so there's only a couple of explanations for why they're not telling us this full story. One, they don't know. They haven't done any research. B, they do know, but they decide not to tell it because they think it's too much information for people to handle, or it's not relevant, or it's boring, or they're deliberately withholding it because they want to give you a certain slant on the story, and this is inconvenient facts.
Yeah. Or their masters are making them toe the line. The owners of these various agencies, or who knows, the directors. Yeah, someone's purpose is being served. When you have an omission like this, someone's purpose is being served.
So that's all I've got, Ray, on this situation. Like, again, I'm going to close by reiterating this. Please. For the people that are fucking hard of hearing and are going to, go on Facebook and say, you said X, Y, and Z, which I never said. I'm not saying this isn't happening, and I'm not saying that it isn't horrible. I'm saying that The stories have big problems. The sources have big problems and are very easily to pick apart. And I want to know why. And I want to know why the flakiness of the sources isn't being reported on by the media. Two, I want to know why the coverage of this is so extreme and wall to wall and over the top versus the coverage of the treatment of the Palestinians or prisoners in Guantanamo or Australians asylum seekers or whatever it is in the country of wherever you're reading the Uighur stories, your own country's level of atrocities. And I just want people to not, so I want people to think a little bit more deeply about this stuff and develop a sense, a bullshit filter for like, look, this sounds horrible, but it sounds way too conveniently horrible. Way too conveniently horrible. Like prisoners were made to sit on a chair of nails. I mean, come on, you've been watching too many fucking Rambo movies, really, coming up with these stories. I mean, next they'll be like, they were putting fucking electrodes on his testicles. This is an 80s Cold War. Look at how depraved the communists are, kind of stuff, right? It's over the top. You don't like.
Grain of salt.
But then again, we have photos from American torture CIA. What was the American CIA torture camp?
Abu Ghraib.
Abu Ghraib.
Well, didn't we
America was literally torturing people. So,
didn't we convict one or two people for that? So you're welcome.
Low ranking soldiers.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hadn't even thought about Abu Ghraib until now, but America tortured the fuck out of people for years.
A lot of people have done it.
Probably still doing it. Yeah.
It's none of your business, Cam.
Justified torture. No, it's not torture. It was enhanced interrogation techniques. So I forgot.
National security. It's all about national security.
Anyway, that's all I have to say on that. If you disagree, listen, and I said this to Liam Bussell, and I'll reiterate it again if he's listening. Look, if you want to argue with me on this, feel free. I welcome challenges. I welcome arguments. I welcome being proven wrong. But the best way to do it is to come on the show and let's have a discussion about it. Making up shit that I didn't say and saying I said it on Facebook is not gonna get my attention.
Exactly.
It's not gonna fly.
It's not gonna fly.
I'm just gonna call you out for speaking bullshit. If you wanna challenge me on any of this, and this is open invitation to anyone, send me an email, CameronRiley@gmail.com, and we'll line up a time. Come on, let's have a discussion about it. Let's have a debate about it. Tell me why I'm wrong and how I'm wrong. I welcome it.
Yes,
I welcome it. I don't give a fuck. China could be run by,
Martians.
Who's the guy from Harry Potter with no nose? He could be run by him.
Voldemort.
He
who shall not be named. Yeah.
A bunch of cloned Voldemorts. I mean, I don't care. As we said last time, we're not being paid by China yet. We're free agents. I'm more than happy for it to come out that all of this is true and China's, the embodiment of evil. But show me your sources. Show me your facts.
But you made this point months ago. It's pretty much trying to find out. We're trying to understand more fully the process of organized lying to the various peoples in the various countries. We just want to expose it, understand it better. Figure out why or how it's so systematic. We're just trying to figure out, because the new weapon is social media. It's about lying. It's about controlling someone's mind. You can control the gun in someone's hand, or you can control the mind that holds the gun. And that's what people are trying to do with propaganda.
Deep. The mind that controls the gun, Ray Harris.
Thank you. Let me write that down.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode of the Bullshit Filter, folks. Don't be a cunt. Be nice to each other. Scotty Burbick, if you're listening, you know what you got to do. Don't fuck up. Don't make me proud. I mean, don't
make him proud. I got this.
That.
Make him proud. Yeah.